Kathleen tell you about herself, and she's graciously agreed to give us this program. We all take wildlife shots, and we all do post-processing. So this should be of major interest to all of our members and the other CACA members that we have here from other clubs around the area, all 34 of us. So Kathleen, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Carlos. I appreciate the invitation to be here. And thanks to Rich for suggesting that I come in to your club when he joined me up in Ottawa, Canada for Snowy Owls. So my name is Kathleen Reeder. I am a pro wildlife photographer. I'm full-time doing photography. I run photo workshops, mostly now in Canada and the US only. I did my last Africa trip last fall. And I also create SmugMug websites for photographers. So if you either have a website or don't have one yet, I'm happy to help you get that set up and established. And I do a lot of portfolio reviews, and especially in doing workshops and SmugMug websites, I help people process their images, not necessarily doing the processing, but pointing out what the opportunities are for post-processing. So I'm delighted to be able to share my thoughts and insights with you tonight. And so let me just share my screen here and start the slideshow. Yes, so tonight's itinerary then is all about post-processing your wildlife images. And that would be to maximize the impact of what you witnessed and felt when you press that shutter. And for the most part, raw images do always require some post-processing to become a finished image. My process, and I always start off by saying, you know, it doesn't really matter what tools you use. There are lots of solutions on the market, software solutions. And I think, as Carlos mentioned, it's just ones that you get comfortable using and will consistently use that are important. For me, I use Photo Mechanic as my tool. It's by Camera Bits to initially ingest them into my desktop, to rename them, to rank them, and to decide which ones that I actually want to post-process. And then I use Adobe Photoshop, the Topaz Denoise AI tool, the DxO Knit collection, and Tony Kuiper luminosity masks to clean up and enhance my photos. And I'm going to show you some of that in a few minutes. And then I publish my images to my SmugMug website, to Getty Images, and to social media. So for cleanup, for every photo, I identify what the target is or targets and where I want the viewer's attention to go. I also then maximize my white and black tones within the image, and I'll show you how I do that. And then I eliminate the digital noise and sharpen the image. And I do that for every image. For some images, not every, but most need some additional cleanup. And that's may be a combination of any of the things that you see listed on this slide: correcting white balance, exposure, color, recovering blown out highlights, increasing shadows, straightening the horizon line, cropping it, eliminating distractions, minor and or major. For enhancements, I'm drawing attention to the targets. And that might be just the eyes. Typically, it's the eyes of the animal or the subject. And it may also be drawing attention to an interaction. It might be drawing attention to claws or to feathers or a beak. It might be drawing attention to horns on an animal. But they're always small and purposeful adjustments. A little really goes a long way. One of the things that I noticed when I review people's images, especially when I'm doing websites, is that sometimes people are taking an adjustment and they're applying it to the entire image, and not all adjustments should be made to the entire image. Selective adjustments on certain areas is really, it's better. It may not be something your tool supports, but finding a way to be able to do those selective changes is really helpful to images. And for me, the key is to create contrast between shadow and illumination, light versus dark, cool versus warm, and color tones, textured versus smooth, vibrant versus muted, continuing to draw that viewer's attention to the target or targets in your image. And as you're getting started, just a couple of tips before I show some images. Very important to calibrate your screens periodically, and that includes both your desktop and your laptop. They do get out of whack just a little bit over time. And even though you might get a brand new monitor and it's great for the first year, it's so important, especially that you're relying on your visual sight of the image to make your adjustments, that your white is correct on the screen, and therefore the other colors are white or correct because you've correctly calibrated to white. I use a Datacolor Spider X Pro, and it's easy enough. You're putting one half of it on the front of the screen and the other half is balanced on the back, and I do it in a dark room, follow the prompts, and it goes through and makes the change, shows me then the before and the after, and I can apply that calibration file. And, I think Datacolor recommends that you do it like monthly. I just don't have time to keep doing it all the time. So, I try to make sure for sure that I do it once a year, but quarterly is even better. I think quarterly is a reasonable time frame within which to do that. Some general tips for post-processing, and since you'll have this recorded, you can always take a screen print of this if there's something you want to reference. So I always suggest to my clients to have a standard file naming convention. So you're bringing in your raw images into your computer, or if you're shooting JPEG, you're bringing the JPEG versions. And then I'm always changing the name that comes from my camera to a standard convention. I use a 4-digit year, 2-digit month, 2-digit day, and then I note the location, and if it's a species within that location, and then a sequential number. So quite a bit of logic. And then when I'm starting off with a NEF, and I rename my NEF files as I shoot Nikon, and then as I save my image after I'm done with my post-processing, I'll save it with that same name with the extension of TIFF, and then with all my layers, and then I save a high resolution JPEG, and then I downsize it to usually 1000 or 1200 pixels on the longest side, and then append it with web, and then save that as a JPEG as well. So I always have, for any processed image, I have 4 files: a NEF, the TIFF, the high-res JPEG, and a web JPEG. I think it's important to have a meaningful folder structure. I have about 1.5 million images. I have 2 72 terabyte drives, one in the Midwest and one here in Phoenix. And it's important that I be able to find a file if I need to, and I'm able to very easily find the location of where a file is based on a meaningful folder structure. I'm kind of particular about how all of those things get organized. So I keep them on my hard drives. I have my high resolution JPEGs in the cloud on my SmugMug website. And by the fact that I have the 2 drives in 2 different states, I've got a copy of it off premise. And then as I go between Phoenix and Minnesota, I'll bring a 5 terabyte drive and copy anything that's changed or that's new on that drive to ensure that both of my hard drives in both states are the same. One of the things that I suggest, I would say I don't abide by it 100% of the time, is that there be a standard aspect ratio that you use for cropping. I will try to apply that to start with, but if it doesn't work for me compositionally, then I don't use it. But when you're selling your images and people are wanting to make a print or to have something framed, by sticking to, as much as you can, standard aspect ratios like 2:3, 4:5, 5:7, 1:1 for squares, and then 1:2 and 1:3 for panoramics, which one thing is kind of interesting. A lot of our cameras and the tools show 16:9 as the pano, and yet to do printing, a lot of times you can't get 16:9. It's more of a 1:2 or 1:3. So it's helpful if you have it set up, some of these standard aspect ratios set up when you are cropping, to at least see if how you want a crop would fit into one of those. It helps it on the back end for customers buying your prints. I think it's important to also have a standard branding or logo. I use a photo logo signature, and I apply that to all of my processed images. I use that on my website as a transparent watermark. Whether you just have a copyright symbol in your name and all rights reserved, but you place it on anything that you post on the web, especially, and if you've got a website, have that transparent watermark. That's important for protecting your image. And then in terms of metadata, finally, when I do ingest my images into my computer, my desktop, using Photo Mechanic, and I'm renaming them, I'm also putting basic metadata into the files. And minimally, I put my photographer name, the copyright symbol, and my name and my website name, and also country, because that is a required element when I'm submitting photos to Getty. So if you're doing stock photography, always helpful to have the country already preloaded. Additional data is helpful: title, caption, location, event, city, state, keywords. I, for a while, got away from putting in keywords, and now the more and more I submit to Getty, the more that I know what keywords they use, and am embedding those directly into the files before I submit the photos. And at any time, if you've got any questions at all, or have any questions, even if it's not pertaining exactly to the topic I'm on or the slide I'm on, please feel free to jump in. I wanted to share this slide in particular with you. Dean Harrison wrote a book called Return to Eden. He is the co-founder of Out of Africa Wildlife Park, one of the locations that I teach at. And his book outlines wildlife instincts, their unlearned stimulus response behaviors. And it's, if you understand these things, when you're taking the photos and it evokes an emotion or a feeling in you, it's helpful to know what is it about that photo that draws you to it, because it also helps you then to anticipate and look for those kinds of opportunities in your photography. So the primary instincts are safety, self-preservation, acquisition of food or looking for food, maintenance of territory, an animal space. And it's interesting, it's called marriage and family relationships, but it is, that is important, that socialization between animals is very important. And much of their behavior is driven by these primary instincts. There's a whole list of supportive instincts. Play is the only one that is only for animals that are warm-blooded. So reptiles, amphibians don't have that sense of play. But many of these things, seasonal changes in weather, you know, when it's a heavy storm outside, animals will tend to hunker down. And then when they come out after the weather is okay again, they're looking for food, they're making sure it's safe. And so you can anticipate that, you know, on certain kinds of weather patterns, that you're not likely going to see as many animals out. Possession, once an animal has food and they need to eat that, they're going to be more possessive about it, protective of it. Play and chase, you know, an antelope runs by, cheetah can't help but want to chase it. So there's a whole bunch of instincts that then drive what our feelings are when we see the world through their eyes. For me personally, feeling that deep connection with wildlife is what drives my passion for wildlife photography. And something else that's listed here might be what drives you. I really enjoy seeing the interaction between two animals or two species that are feeling either whether it's possessiveness or it's a feeling of socialization, and I feel their connection to each other, whether it's positive or negative. That makes me feel as, oh, I have a deep connection to them. When I see things happen that are humorous, it just gives me a tickle. And so it's all of these emotions that are evoked and feelings in us that then when we share that photo with the world, we're hoping that it conveys that same feeling. And so the more that you understand these instincts and the feelings they invoke, the better your images can be as you are out taking them. So when you're selecting images, so we were talking at the beginning before I got started about how many images we take these days of wildlife before we decide which ones to process. And I mean, I might take 2,000 photos and process only half a dozen. And it's these kinds of things on this slide that influence which photos I'm selecting. Are the eyes tack sharp? Is there catch light in the eye? That's a bonus. Are there minimal background, vertical or horizontal lines that go directly through or merge with the subject's head or neck? Including it might be branches, it might be just shadow line from a rock, but I look for photos that don't have that. I look for photos that have nice tonal contrast between the head of the subject and the background. Am I at eye level with the subject? Not always, and so that can influence whether I process a photo or not. Whether there are appendages, any ears, tail, feet, wings clipped. I'll look for ones where things are not clipped. Is there visual separation between the body parts? So if it's an antelope and there's horns and ears, I ideally want space between the ears, space between the horns, that I see really complete separation between them. And it can also be legs. If it's a four-legged animal, I preferably want all four legs visible in the frame, not one behind another, so that it doesn't look like a tripod. And nothing's blown out, no highlights are blown out, particularly on the subject. I can always crop it later if it's something other than the subject. I did, and I'll just skip this slide. It's really outlining what is my backup system. It doesn't matter what yours is, you just want to have something. And so if that question does come up, I can always come back to that slide. Now I want to share some photos with you. And I'm going to go into Photo Mechanic. I'll pause though to see if there's just any questions at this point before I kind of get into sharing photos.
Hey, Kathleen, I got a couple questions.
Sure.
When you calibrate your monitor, what do you set the brightness to?
I don't. I do it in dark, and I let
But the monitor could be 80, 100, 120 nits, lumens. Do you just let whatever the software gives you?
Yeah.
Okay. Because for me, that's important when I'm printing, to get the print color, this luminosity, the same as the screen. Also, when you're shooting in bursts, we all get a lot of good pictures, a burst of all good pictures, very similar. Do you have any way to pick which one of them, or do you just say one of them looks good and you use that one?
Yeah, and there might be just very, very, very slight differences between a burst. And I'm looking for the one where maybe the eye is the widest open, or the stance is a little just slightly more erect. Just those teeny little nuances. Because if they're so similar, very, very similar, then it's just those things that are different.
Okay, so you have to look very carefully at them. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, before we started, Kathleen and I were talking about Fast Raw Viewer. For those of you who don't have Photo Mechanic, a less expensive option is Fast Raw Viewer, which allows you to really quickly cull through hundreds, thousands of shots and select away the ones you want to keep. So I recommend it.
Excellent. All right. I'll keep moving then, and feel free to jump in if there's any questions. So what I'm going to show you now, it's sort of pulling back the screen here, no smoke and mirrors. So I'm going to show you the original raw image, the NEF file with nothing done, and then I'm going to show you my finished process photo. And we'll go through a few of those, and I would just want to mainly, again, it's not so important what tools you choose to use, but when you look at an image, first, do you feel that connection, or do you feel, you get the feeling back that you had in the moment that you press the shutter? That's drawing you to the image. And then the changes you make, you want to emphasize and maximize that impact of the target. And in this case, this is a mountain lion at Arizona Sonoran Desert Museum, captive mountain lion in Arizona. And so when I look at this image, it's a bit flat. I don't see the impact of the color, but I do feel the connection to the mountain lion. He's looking directly at me. With this image, the target are his eyes, but I really want to have more of an impact of change of color and warm it up. It's a little bit dull looking. I also, as I look at it, I don't really need that far left rock. I want to get rid of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the before and the after. So what I did, so this is the original raw and then the finished processed image. So in this case, I've cropped it to crop the left side of the rock off the frame. And then I've darkened down the inside of that cave to where it's just pure black in the photo. And then I've warmed up the rock that is surrounding him and increased the brightness of his eyes. And eyes are really important. You don't always just want to brighten up the entire eye. Most importantly, you want to brighten the catchlight, the reflection and the catchlight in the eye. So it's the white highlight that is in the top half of the eye and a little bit of the color below the pupil, and then potentially darkening down the areas that are black around it. There are a couple of ways to do that, and I'll show you how I've done it in a couple different cases. But don't assume that you just want to brighten up the entire eye. And you don't want to do too much. I have seen so many animal photos where the eyes are completely different color, or where the eyes look like, it almost looks like a robot. And for me as a viewer, I lose connection to that moment when the eyes are way overdone. So I'm going to share another set of images here. So this first image is the before, and for me, what I felt when I saw this was the love and relationship between these juvenile lions. And it just so happened that as two of them were on top of one of their siblings, and they were licking the face of their sibling, that sibling then just happened to look at me. And so for me, the targets were primarily the eyes. And so I cropped in. If you look at the eyes, you may not see a big change, but I worked the eyes as well as in adding a little more warmth into the photo. I don't always change the colors. I don't always create that dynamic contrast, but it just varies based on the image. But in this case, I wanted to draw the attention down to the lion on the ground and the interaction between them. I also was careful. I didn't want to crop the ears of the other two. So this turned out to not work with a standard aspect ratio, but I think it's always good to try that. Next one. So the image on the left of the screen, so this is a herd of horses running towards me. They're ranch horses, not wild horses. And I want to make sure that I maximize the whites of the snow. And in some cases, I'm okay with some amount of the snow blowing out completely in order to get a real good white in the snow. And it is a little bit gray here. And when you're shooting in snow, as you probably know, being in Chicago, you do need to overexpose, because the cameras, if you're metering on the entire frame, the camera is going to underexpose the snow because it's just trying to make it a middle gray. I also want to draw more contrast between the background and the horse. So this is the finished image. And this image, it didn't require cropping much. I cropped a little bit off the top of the frame and a little bit on the bottom of the frame. You can see that the snow is brighter and there's a little more contrast with the horses. So you can see the changes are not significant, except one of the first photo I showed you of the mountain lion, I thought that was pretty significant change, but otherwise not a huge difference, but more impactful. So this first image is a moose, a bull moose in Grand Teton National Park. And I've got a telephone wire going through the top third of the frame. I've got a dust spot in the top third, and it's snowing. It's very overcast and just kind of dull looking. In the processed image, I removed the telephone wire, got rid of the dust spot, punched the colors of the bushes on the ground, punched a little bit of the orange in the trees and brush around, and punched a little bit of the red in the moose, and just put as much emphasis on the impact of that moose reaching for the tree. Next one, whoops, I'm going to close that up here. So the photo on the left is of a grizzly bear taken in Kutsumateen Grizzly Bear Sanctuary in British Columbia, Canada. And for me, the reflection, his claws, and just the beauty of that contrast between the color of the bear and the green grass, I thought was really beautiful. And so I chose to crop in quite a bit just to the bear. And you can see the face is much brighter. There's obviously a lot more impact of the colors. I used a tool to bring out a little more detail on the claws, and pretty much cropped out the base grass that was below or more in the foreground, and the rocks completely. The next one, this was 3 lions taken in South Africa, and right at the water hole, I wanted their eyes, I wanted a bit of the reflection. And even though the colors were good, I wanted that background to be darker and the water to be darker to create, again, more contrast between the lions and the background and foreground. So the finished image, I did crop a bit off the right, a bit off the foreground, the water, punched the colors, the contrast on the lions, and really chose to darken down that background. And I have to say, every time I process a photo another time, it's different, and I don't do things in the same sequence. The only thing that I am very consistent at doing is because I use Photoshop, I'll open up Camera Raw first. So I'm always maximizing my white and black tones first in Camera Raw. And then I bring the photo into Photoshop. And the very first thing I do is apply the Topaz Denoise AI plugin. So I do that first before I do anything else. And that I am doing consistently first. But otherwise, the sequence in which I make adjustments is nearly arbitrary. It just depends on what sort of hits me in the moment as something I want to change.
Are you using layers in Lightroom to do any of this?
Yes.
Photoshop?
Yes. The only thing that I do destructively without layers is to remove dust spots. And if I'm doing any kind of cloning or spot healing, I'm doing that before I start using my layers. But in layers, I'm doing my denoise, all of my DXO Nick filter changes, my Tony Kuiper luminosity mask changes. That's all done in layers.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. The next photo is a mountain lion in, I love big cats. So if I could, I would, every photo here would be all big cats, because that's totally my thing. This is a captive mountain lion. He lives in Arizona. He was found without a mom, and Arizona Game and Fish rescued him, and has his forever home at Out of Africa Wildlife Park. His name is Sage. He's 5 years old now. And during my workshops there, you get to photograph him right at the fence. So this is through a fence, and he runs off, gets a treat, and then as he's walking back, the group is taking pictures of him. And I always encourage everyone to exclude the sky from the composition, because we're photographing him right as the sun is coming up. And so what happens is that you end up underexposing him and overexposing, and you can't help but overexpose the sky. So I always suggest excluding the sky. So the sky is not the most attractive in this photo, and for the reasons I mentioned. So in this photo, my horizon line is off, and of course I want to draw emphasis on him. So the finished image, I left a little bit of the sky just because I thought it added to the composition, but I increased the brightness again of the catch light in his eyes, and a little bit of the reflection of that in the color. But the color is still the same, just punched a little bit. And I love using in the DXO Nick filters the dynamic contrast. It's under Pro Contrast, and I apply that quite often to a photo. I fixed the horizon. You can see that it's straighter now, and you can see the colors are a little more vibrant. One thing that can be helpful if you use Photoshop and you're straightening an image, you can either use the horizon as a way to straighten, but you can also use an animal's eyes. And so within Photoshop, there's a tool to put one point at one side and second point, and then the photo is straightened based on those two lines in comparison to the overall image. And sometimes because most times animals' heads are straight, regardless of whether your camera is off. And I'll use one pupil and have the second point be the other eye, and let the eyes of the animal decide the straightening. And that has worked in a number of cases. So just as a small tip. Another example. So this was taken in Minnesota of a wolf pack on carcass, on a white-tailed deer carcass. Minnesota Wildlife Connection is the name of the location. And what I particularly liked about this image, and even though I think my ISO was at 10,000, it was snowing, and I wanted enough depth of field to get both animals largely in focus, at least around their heads. And I was a pretty close range. I think I may have been at 200 millimeter, and without much light. So my ISO and my shutter speed was probably 1/1000th of a second. So my ISO was really high, but boy, was I happy with how denoise handled it. But I particularly liked the possessiveness. So this is, acquisition of food. And while there is socialization, there's an alpha male, an alpha female, and if another male is in there and the alpha male has not finished eating yet, there's going to be that interaction of, get back off. And so I loved capturing that moment. The processed image, I cropped both of the trees out on both sides, wanted to make sure I kept the antler of the deer, and then put as much emphasis on that interaction between the two wolves. So I brightened up the eyes and brightened up the teeth, And I may have darkened the nose even of the animals and cropped in. Now this probably was not a standard aspect ratio. I find I'll try that first. If it doesn't work, I just go with what I like for an image. Another example, let's see here. So this is in Alaska in Katmai National Park, probably off of Hallow Bay somewhere. May have been Nat Geo Bay. So this is brown bear, coastal brown bear. And I particularly liked the reflection of the bear. You know, I always try to photograph the subject off center, and I really liked the reflection of the mountains in the water. My horizon line was off, and I did want to bring more detail up in the landscape itself. So the processed image is what's shown on the right, and I cropped in some, but tried to minimize how much I cropped off. I cropped mostly a little bit on the top and a little bit on the bottom, but you can see for the most part it's the original. Punch the colors a little bit. As I look at them side by side, I think I may have put a little too much green into the processed image. I find that a lot of cool environments, there'll be too much blue. And so I try to color correct in post. I think I may have slightly overcorrected because I don't really like the photo on the right as much as when I set them next to each other as much as I could have. So good learning, always good to go back and look at your original, look at your processed, and maybe you'll do it differently the next time. Next one. So this image is a possum with her babies. And what drew me immediately to this photo is the second one in the group of babies having its mouth open. I could just hear them saying, "Mom," or "Stop," or "Get away from me," or something, you know, some kind of interaction. And I just love the fact that he was saying something. And the processed image, you can see I cropped a little bit on the right. Also, there was a little owie on the tail of the mom, and I fixed that in post. I thought I don't really need to see a little bloody tip on the possum. Darkened down the base of the tree. And if you look at the eyes of the mom and all the babies, just do a side-by-side comparison. As you glance between them, you'll see that all the eyes have been brightened up, not the black of the eye, but the white, the highlight. That catch light in the eye has been brightened up in every single one of those. So that was important for me to have all those eyes being as bright as possible. Kind of one of the worst things is when you've got a great picture of a bird, but because it wasn't taken in any kind of good light, you've got their eyes look all black. To me, that gives it's kind of a dead look. And I'm always hoping and trying to bring out that catch light in the eyes. Next one, this is baboons, and I took this in South Africa, and I just love the fact that as this other mom was walking by, the mom that's got her baby is looking at that mom, and the baby who's nursing is also looking over at the other mom. So I wanted to accentuate that interaction. And so I wasn't going to crop out the one that was walking by. I just wanted to bring out the shadows that were on the faces of the mom and baby, but leave in some part of the other baboon that was walking by. And so I did crop. And when you're cropping, you want to try to not crop right on an elbow or a knee, and so I cropped just after the one leg on the left, and not including then the other front leg. And then spent time with the eyes. You can see a lot of the shadows being brought up. As long as you haven't blown something to all black or to all white, you can bring those details up in post-processing. I did do a bit of a color correction as well. The photo on the left has a little too much blue in it, so I did bring bring more of the yellow into the scene in post. This next image I took in South Africa at Tiger Canyon. They also have cheetahs, and there is a special place because when you go there and you go out on a game drive to find the cheetahs, once you find them, you can actually get out on the ground and photograph them at ground level, which is just fabulous. I love that. And in this case, I way overexposed. So I was at either a plus 2.7 or a plus 3 exposures, brighter than what the camera was telling me it should expose at, because I wanted to really brighten up all that dead grass and isolate the cheetah in the composition. So the post photo, I did flip it. I think that I find that an animal moving from left to right is more interesting than the other way around. So I do tend to look for that. And in this case, I flipped it as I was processing it. The other thing I did is I brightened up that background. I darkened the spots. And this was one example of where I would use the Tony Kuiper luminosity masks, because I wanted to darken all of the spots, but to try to do that selectively. And there's probably another way to do it. I think the Lightroom masking tools have come a long way as well. So I don't profess to know what tools work better than the ones I'm using or work equally as well. I just know what I'm comfortable using, just as I suggest that you just find what you're comfortable using and stick with it, and which is what I've done. I thought about moving to Lightroom years ago, but I started using Photoshop in the 90s, and I just am comfortable with it. So I've stuck with it. In this case, I brightened up the cheetah's eyes. Again, didn't change the color. I've seen some people's photos of cheetahs where the eyes are really orange, like bright orange, and really encourage you to soft changes, subtle changes, that really yields a better photo in the end, unless you're looking for something really artistically different than what we saw. And that's fine, absolutely, like whatever rocks your boat. But if you want it to look like what you saw to some degree, then I suggest trying to keep it as real as possible.
Kathleen, a quick question. What was your thinking in brightening the background even more here? Because, I kind of like that texture on the left side, and on the right side, there's way less texture.
Yeah.
What was your thinking in doing that?
I just liked it better. And it's interesting to get your feedback that you actually like the original amount better. I even would have liked it if it was completely white. I've gone for that in some of my photos. It just gives me more of kind of a full high key fine art look, but it's a personal choice. I would like, if I saw someone's photo of this, the original or the processed, I would like both of them.
Yeah, with the new Lightroom masking tools, it's super easy to just say select background and then just slide the slider all the way, and boom, you got white or black,
Cool.
a background, instead of like the old days, right? Having to go into Photoshop and select it and clear it and, all that stuff that we used to do.
I think I may have one more to share. So the photo on the left I took in Alaska, outside of Homer in Kachemak Bay, and it was snowing out, which does make it a challenge for focus. I have a mirrorless camera, and the subject tracking does pretty well, actually exceptionally well, except in snow. If it's big flakes and they're falling slowly, it does lose it sometimes. So that was a challenge, but I love the eagle in snow. I love that look. The processed image, obviously this eagle was flying out of frame, so I don't want that. I also didn't really like the snow that was on the rocks in the background. I thought that was a little distracting. And when I brought this image up, and if you haven't photographed eagles out in this kind of environment, the biggest challenge with photographing eagles is not blowing out their head and tail. And so I am employing exposure compensation changes on the fly throughout the day. And when I bring a group to Alaska, I'm always calling out what is my current exposure compensation. Especially in cloudy or snowy days, I can easily be at a minus, even though you would think that if it's like this, that you would be at a potentially a plus exposure compensation. In snowy conditions, what happens is when the background is dark, the overall exposure, the camera will decide to make it overall brighter, and there, in effect, it ends up blowing out the head and tail. So the sort of rule of thumb that I guide people in is when you're in a photographing eagles, if you have a bright background, you'll end up using a plus exposure compensation. When you have a dark background to the eagle, you'll use a negative exposure compensation. So it is different than photographing other subjects in the wild. And in this case, I missed it just by a little bit. So I lost a little bit of detail on the head in this one. In the finished image, I cropped in so that the eagle was more flying into the frame and not looking as though it's flying out of the frame. And I also cloned out those snowy elements on the rocks in the background. And as I look at the finished image, I did lose just a little bit of detail on that head. Not an easy thing to manage when you're out in the field. But I was happy I loved the blues, the cool feeling. And I know a lot of people prefer no snow, nice and clean, none of these spots overlaying the eagle, but I kind of like the snowy condition. I sort of liked how that looked. And so those are the images that I was going to share. And now I'm going to go back, Carlos, to you. I'm happy to share processing one of these, or if you feel that we've touched on the subject enough, then I'm fine with just opening up for any questions and turning the show back over to you.
Well, I'd like to see you processing what your thinking was in one of those. We still have some time before we can get to questions in a little bit.
Okay. Is there one in particular that you would like to see me process?
Anybody?
Yeah, the first mountain lion would be good, just to help us understand how you punch the color, as you say.
Okay. All right, so let me show you first the TIFF, and that would share with you then the changes that are in the layers. And then if you like, I'm happy to actually start from scratch and show it to you. So this is in Photoshop. This is the finished image. And if I'll turn off all the layers. And this photo I shot before Topaz denoise came out. So it is not denoised with that Topaz tool. But in this case, so I use the DxO NIC filters quite heavily. And so most of the changes that I made in my layers in this image were with the DxO NIC filters. So first with Vivesa, and you can see that what I did the first one was just to bring a little more structure and vibrance to the rocks. Then skylight filter in the Color Effects Pro. So I'm turning on and off these effects so that you can see the change. So in DxO, there is a skylight, it's in Color Effects Pro. You can make things a more warm tone. And so in all cases with DxO, I brush those changes in, so I don't make them holistically to the composition, only to those areas that I want to affect. And so in this case, I wanted to warm up the rocks and the mountain lion. So I used that skylight filter. And again, I have to say that if I did all this again, I would probably do it differently. But ultimately, I still like the look of it. Detail extractor, you can see on the chin and the side of the fur, that was at that time, that was my solution for trying to bring back some detail that I had lost by blowing out that fur. You always have to watch those white areas of the animal. And I took this photo back in 2014. So I would have probably fixed this in Camera Raw before I brought it into Photoshop. Then Vivesa I used to further darken down the black, and I still didn't get all of it with that change. Again, I'm pretty careful about not doing too much at once. Then the next one brought more punch in the colors. Again, that was Vivesa. And then it looks like I maybe toned down a little bit of it. Next change, what did I do here? Trying to look on the photo to see what I actually changed. Looks like I brought a little bit of tonal contrast, it looks like, to the mountain lion, and then a little more. And lastly, I completely blackened out that background. So in this case, with this photo, it was a lot of Vivesa in the DxO Nik filters and skylight filter in Color Effects Pro and detail extractor. So these were essentially the changes I went through. Now, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, perfect. Thank you very much for that. Very helpful.
Oh, good. Awesome. And I can share the same with the others too. So turning things off and then turning them back on, I think it just gives you a kind of a quick understanding. So look at the eyes of the lion that's laying down. And that's how I popped those.
Did you consider taking out some of the foreground stuff, leaf or whatever?
Like this one leaf is distracting. I don't like this one leaf. Yeah, if I process this again, I would probably remove that leaf. But the other leaves don't bother me. But this one, and that's right in front below his eyes, that bothers me. Next, so the next tool is also under the Nik collection. It looks like I don't label. I'm not consistent about labeling my changes, so all I can see is generally what tool I used. But the Nik collection tool looks like I used possibly tonal contrast and applied it to the entire frame. I didn't mask it and then paint it. Vivesa looks like I brightened up the faces a little bit. And then lastly, I put a little bit of darkness around the edges. My photo of the bear, if I turn everything off, brightness. See, all I changed with this first change is just the eyes. And so the white that's around the eye, I brightened that up, and a little bit of the catch light. So very minimal, but just enough to just pop it a little bit. I darkened the background in the next one. You can see that green darkened down without having it impact the bear. And then detail extractor. If you look at the bear's claws, you'll see them just be have a little more definition, especially the ones on the right back foot. And then lastly, it looks like I brightened up the bear a little bit.
Hey, Kathleen.
Yes.
What is detail extractor? Is it a plugin, or I'm not familiar with it?
No. So detail extractor, and I'll bring up a tool here. So Color Effects Pro is one of the DxO Nik collections, and detail extractor is one of my favorites. If I bring that up here, so this is the DxO NIC filters all have defaults, and I once in a while will use the default and other times won't, but the default right now, it's applying it to the entire image. And if I look at the before and after, and primarily only look at the claws. That's where I generally use detail extractor, is on claws and skin of rhinos and elephants, because it brings up more texture. And so if I were to brush this, what I would do is take this back into Photoshop, increase the size of the image, use a small paintbrush. I've got my opacity to 100%, and then I would just paint the claws.
You're painting white at that point.
What's that?
In the layer mask, you're painting white.
It shows as me painting. I'm only painting on the claws itself, and in the mask, I know it's very small in the little layer, but it shows white where I've painted.
Okay, got it. And what do you do to sharpen?
And for sharpening, I do that as part of my my Topaz Denoise AI. So if I bring up an image, let me just grab one of these here. I'll grab my possums. So if I go to edit this photo, it comes up in Camera Raw. And initially, like I said, the main two things that I do, and I use a PC, so not Mac, on my computer. So I'm going to express these changes using the keyboard for PC, but I want to maximize my whites. And I think this is pretty similar to the way it looks in Lightroom. So hopefully everyone can relate to this. So I'll click the Alt key and click the white slider, and everything turns to black. And now if I slide that to the right, it will show me when something has turned to all white, and I want to back off that. So I want to maximize the whites by taking that as far as I can without blowing anything out. And I want to do the same on the blacks. Now, in this case, when I click the Alt key and hold the slider button down, it shows that some things in the image are already black. Now, if it was on the animal, I would be concerned and would back that off by going to a plus to bring that back up. But since it's on it's on the actual wood, I don't care as much, but I don't want it to be on the animal because I want to be able to maximize how much leverage I have with the subject itself. So, and in my settings in Camera Raw, I'm using ProPhoto, RGB, and 16-bit. And once I've set that, now anytime I open an image, it opens with those settings. So when I go to open it, for the first thing that I do is to run it through Topaz Denoise AI. And I'll show you the setting that I almost by default use on every image. So I use the clear function, and which requires pretty much minimal thinking on my part. And if I go, let me go right over to here, and it runs it through and updates it and shows me what it looks like with and without. So if I pull the slider back and forth, you can see the impact of that setting. And I use medium for removal of noise and high for enhanced sharpness. And I don't do any other sharpening after that.
Have you ever gotten another photo of possum like this with babies on its back?
Yeah, I do. And I run workshops there. I do it for every workshop. We do that. Yeah.
Oh, so that's not an uncommon photo.
No. Well, I think the actual situation where the one is got its mouth open, seemingly yelling, I haven't gotten that image, but we get them in flowers and with all the babies on them. And yeah, it's a great photo shoot. Possums are just adorable. And in fact, when you do my workshop, we set it up where we lay all the possums down on you and on your camera and on your head and on your lens, and we even put one in the lens. And then I take photos of each person in that in that with all the possums on them. It's pretty fun.
That
Um,
photo,
There was in the chat has a couple of questions.
Okay.
John asked, can you try to edit the photo of the moose and
Okay.
crop it tighter to reduce the sky? He says.
Oh, sure, absolutely could. You want me to? Did you want me to show that, or did you was it just more of just a question of whether I could?
I think he wants you to show that if you could.
Okay, sure. Let me just cancel out of this. Oops, wait. So I'm gonna go to all right, so again, this was the raw and then this was the processed. And you want me to go ahead and bring it up and crop out the telephone wire. Is that what the request was?
Yeah, tighter to reduce the sky.
Okay. Yeah. So if I select the raw and bring that into camera raw, and in this case, again, I would try to maximize my whites by sliding and then maximize my blacks without blowing anything out, and then open it up. And in this case, it looks like it's not straight. It needs to be straightened. And so I would want to do that first. And I could either just slide it this way. It looks like that's better right there. And I would want to bring this down. And then I could crop it in like that. I probably would want to try to keep the tree that's on the right and not clip that one. Certainly, I mean, you could, and then make it more of a horizontal picture. I'd probably crop it, right on, right on the antlers.
Yeah, that was John's suggestion, like half the image.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, right, that would give you a totally different look.
Yeah. Yep. And then work on it from there. And then I would run it through denoise and bring out more of the reds in the image. Yeah, absolutely.
And Neil asks, how much do you refer to a histogram when you're editing, if you do it all?
I refer to it when I'm shooting. And when I bring it into camera raw, if I do see that I've lost detail, then I'm bringing those back in camera raw. But I don't, beyond the fact that I'm pushing my whites and blacks, which is extending the histogram, I don't actually look at the histogram and making those decisions. I use that Alt click and the slider to push those limits as far as I can.
Right, option click on a Mac and say it's the same exact thing.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll just do a time check again. Carlos, don't want to go over my.
No,
when I
we're doing fine.
Okay.
Yeah, any other questions?
Uh,
Go.
that photo of the bear looks like he's almost standing in the water. Was he standing on some ground or wood?
Yes, he was right on the water's edge. So let me just close this and open up. Yes, so in Kutsumateen, we stay on a boat and then we take a Zodiac boat around the estuaries. And so we were in the water in a little Zodiac and he was right down at water's edge. And that's what gives us the ability to be down there real low at eye level, is because we're in a Zodiac really close to where they are down at the water's edge. And he was on, it looks like a log or that was maybe stationary, not floating. He wasn't coming up out of the water.
Anybody
So
else?
maybe I'll show you, let me show you something for eyes, because that's such an important element. Let me bring up, I'm gonna open up the raw image here again of the possum, because I think it's just so important to know comfortably how to do that. And I'm gonna open up the image. So the way that I focus on the eyes, and not all of these eyes are tack sharp, but I want to bring out that catch light. And so I will use a layer and I'll use the brightness contrast. And I'm going to look at the eyes as I slide that to see how bright could I go? How bright could I go? And maybe I've got it up to a 53. And then I'm going to Alt delete, or excuse me, Control delete. And now I'm going to paint it, and I'm going to paint it just on each one of the catch light in each one of their eyes. Keep my paintbrush pretty small, and some of them have hardly any, but there's a little something there on pretty much all of them. And now you've got it, I've got it on, but if I turn it off, I mean, you can see what an impact, I think, what an impact that makes. And I can always choose to slide it a little bit more to even bring out more. So I've got it now at 75 on the brightness, but what an impact just that small adjustment makes. The other way, and let me show you another photo. Let me bring up another raw image. I want to show you another way to do eyes that can work well. Let me try it on Sage here. Is this helpful, you guys?
Absolutely.
Okay. So another way to, so the one way I mentioned, and you see the catch light, the horizon light in his eyes, and I could use a layer, as I just mentioned, and brighten that up, paint it in, and I would, in this case, I would paint it in that horizon line, okay? And then I would also paint it in the reflection under the color of his eye. And just that alone makes a huge impact, I think. But I would never just arbitrarily just pop the whole eye. One thing I would never do is take my paintbrush and just color the whole eye. To me, it doesn't look as impactful as it does if you just do the one little parts. In this case, maybe I guess I didn't make that big of an impact by doing both, but I still believe that just doing the horizon line, that catch light, and then a bit of the reflection in the color is the better way to go. If I didn't do it that way, I have at times used this approach. It's in Vivesa, and Vivesa again is a DxO knit collection tool, and one of the presets in here is called Sharpen Eyes, and they will give you 2 control points. And if I increase the size of this, let me just go in here. You place 1 control point on one eye, and I would reduce the size of that to be closer to the size of the eye. And then you place the other one on the other eye. And this is probably a quick way to do it, but I don't always think it's the best way to do it. So I'm just showing it to you so you're aware of it. So I'll put those on the 2 eyes and then click brush, never just apply it as is. And then typically in this case, using this tool, I never apply it 100%. Usually it's somewhere around 40 or so. And then I'll just click once on each eye. And then I've applied it to that eye. And then there's the before and the after. And I get nearly the same impact.
So you use the brush just to be more specific?
Yes, and to only apply a certain amount, and that way I can kind of go back and forth and try it. What did I like? Do I want to apply a little more? I can erase things, like if I do a dark and lighten to put a little bit of a vignette in a photo, I'll brush it so that I can come back in, see what it looks like holistically, and then maybe take away parts and add more to certain areas.
And if you don't like it, you can just delete that effect by just deleting.
Just dragging the whole thing to the trash, yeah.
Right,
Or
right.
I can start over by clicking the trash can. And let's say I decide I really wanted to apply a higher percentage. I put it in the trash can and then I just reapply it in with the percentage that I want.
Had you thought about making this a vertical?
No, but I've taken so many photos of Sage. But I certainly could. If I did, I would want. Let me just do that. So with and I apply multiple types of tools to help with the composition. So the rule of thirds is a very common one, but there are a number of others. I love the golden spiral, the triangle, the diagonal, and each one of those helps you to decide where to crop, how to crop. And so I encourage you to use more than just the rule of thirds. I love the golden spiral. Golden ratio is nice. And so sometimes if you strictly only do the rule of thirds, you might feel like, well, I want one of those PowerPoints to be in a specific area, and it forces you to crop in one place. And I just think it's good to try different things. So in this case, you know, I might crop it about right there. Putting the top line across the eyes, putting the vertical left line on maybe even a little bit like on the whole left leg. And again, always slightly off center, giving the feeling of the subject moving into the frame, whether it's from the left or to the right or the right.
Have you tried the new denoise feature in Camera Raw?
I haven't yet. No, I haven't.
It's pretty amazing.
Okay, I'll have to check it out.
Other questions, what exposure area do you usually use? Whole frame or spot or?
I generally use matrix for Nikon or evaluative, the whole frame. When I'm doing rim light, or I'm shooting directly into the sun, quite often I'm spot metering. When I'm shooting birds in trees, I'm almost always spot metering so that I don't underexpose the subject. But most of the time, whether it's side lit or front light, I'm shooting in full matrix metering.
And another question, do you ever shoot with auto ISO?
Yes, in fact, I do that almost exclusively now. I used to shoot in aperture priority, and then I shifted to shutter priority. Then for a while, it was like you weren't a real photographer unless you shot totally manual, you know. And I was always concerned about my ISO being too high, so I always wanted to lock in my ISO. But since that Topaz Denoise AI tool came out, now I shoot in manual with auto ISO 95% of the time. And then I use exposure compensation to be adjusting my ISO.
And now people that don't want to pony up for Topaz can use it right in Lightroom, who are Lightroom users, or in Photoshop, Camera Raw.
Awesome.
The new version. Any other questions? All right. Well, if there are no other questions. Oh, someone? Nope. Last call. All right. Well, Kathleen, thank you so much. That was really, really enjoyable looking at your photos and
Thank you very much.
got some great tips. Stuff that I know people are will make an effect. Will have an effect on people's photos. because they were, you know, you've got some really great work, and we want to be that good someday.
Hey, Kathleen, that was very good. Very
Thank
much.
By the way, I
exceeded my
had tried
expectation.
the Adobe, denoise in the camera raw. And all I have to say is don't throw away Topaz yet.
Right, right.
It isn't quite as
Never
good.
throw anything away.
What, you want to tell us again about your workshops and your website and stuff?
Oh, thank you. Sure. Let me just share my screen one more time if I can.
On our webpage, our homepage, we have your link to your website. So people want to get it from there.
So I'll just share that I have a number of workshops that I offer and encourage you to check them out. I've got some that are upcoming in the spring and in the fall that have availability. I have few spots left at a number of them. And so I encourage you to sign up for my newsletter and stay informed on the latest workshops that I'm offering. I do hummingbirds in Arizona, eagles in Alaska, Grand Teton National Park, moose in snow, and bighorn sheep in snow. And then I have a number of one-day workshops, and I teach up at Triple D in Montana and Minnesota Wildlife Connection in Minnesota. So invite you to join me on any of those. I also do, Carlos, have a free online webinar on post-processing coming up this Sunday. I know you guys got most of what I'll be sharing on Sunday, but if you want to hear it again, or just know also that who's ever live on the call on Sunday, I have a few surprises that I'll be giving away. And it's a 2-hour webinar, and it's from your time. It would be 2 to 4 p.m. And if you sign up for my newsletter, or if I know, Rich, you probably would have gotten a copy of this email blast that went out. And I wrote an article for Nature TTL on post-processing, and that's accessible through this email, as well as registering for this free webinar. And if you register for it, you will get the link of the recording. So, but like I said, it's mostly what I presented to you tonight. So
I signed up for it. I'm looking forward to it.
And so, Carlos, if you would like me to send you a link to this email, if that's something that you would like to share with the club.
Sure.
Or if you go to my website and sign up for my newsletter, I will be sending out one more blast about it this week. But it's Sunday, this coming Sunday from 2 to 4 p.m. your time, and it is free.
Cool. All right, I will have this for those of you who want to tell your friends. I will have this up on our YouTube channel, the Garden Photographic Society YouTube channel, in about 12 or 24 hours. It takes a little while usually, but I appreciate so much you coming and talk to us. It was very entertaining and instructional as well, which is always good.
You're very welcome. My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Carlos, do you need to be a member to see the,
No, anybody can log into our garden YouTube channel. The link is on our homepage, gardenphoto.org.
thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Hey, thanks again, Kathleen.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Bye
Thanks.
now.
Very nice.
Bye.